Patricia Washington drove her old pickup truck slowly down Maple Street. She looked at the big houses with their perfect green lawns. Everything looked so clean and neat. After 25 years in the Army, she was finally ready to enjoy a quiet life. She pulled into the driveway of her new house. It was smaller than the others on the street, but it was hers. Patricia smiled as she turned off the engine. No more orders from commanding officers. No more sleeping in tents in the desert. Just peace and quiet. Patricia had saved money for years to buy this house in Oakwood Hills. The neighborhood looked safe and friendly in the pictures online. She wanted a place where she could plant a garden and maybe get a dog. After serving her country in Iraq and Afghanistan, she deserved some happiness. The moving truck arrived an hour later. Patricia watched the men carry her boxes into the house. She did not have much stuff. Most of her life had been spent moving from base to base. She learned to live with only what she really needed. Mrs. Henderson from next door came over while Patricia was unpacking. She was an older white woman with gray hair and a fake smile. "Welcome to the neighborhood," Mrs. Henderson said. She looked Patricia up and down like she was studying her. "I hope you will be happy here." "Thank you," Patricia said. "I am looking forward to it." Mrs. Henderson pointed to a thick book in her hands. "This is the HoA rule book. You need to read it carefully. We have very strict rules here about keeping our neighborhood nice." Patricia took the book. It was heavier than she expected. HoA? Homeowners Association, Mrs. Henderson explained. "We make sure everyone follows the rules. Your grass cannot be too long. Your house must be painted the right colors. No loud music. No parties. Things like that." Patricia nodded. She was used to following rules. The Army had plenty of them. "I understand." "Good," Mrs. Henderson said. She looked at Patricia's pickup truck. "You might want to think about getting a nicer car, too. We like to keep up appearances here." After Mrs. Henderson left, Patricia sat on her front steps and looked through the rule book. There were rules about everything. What color you could paint your mailbox. How tall your grass could be. What kind of flowers you could plant. Even what time you could put your trash cans out. Patricia shook her head. She had fought for freedom in 2 wars. Now she lived in a place with more rules than a military base. The next morning, Patricia went to the hardware store to buy supplies for fixing up her house. The young man at the counter was friendly and helped her load everything into her truck. "You new around here?" he asked. "Just moved to Oakwood Hills," Patricia said. The man's face changed. "Oh, well, good luck with that." "What do you mean?" "That HoA can be pretty tough on newcomers, especially if you are different from the rest of them." Patricia thought about what he meant by different. She had a feeling she knew. When she got home, there was already a yellow paper stuck to her front door. It was a violation notice. The HoA said her truck was parked too close to the street. She had to move it or pay a $50 fine. Patricia measured the distance with a tape measure. Her truck was exactly where it should be according to the rules, but she moved it anyway. She did not want trouble on her first day. Over the next week, Patricia worked hard to make her house look nice. She painted the front door, planted flowers, and fixed the broken fence in the backyard. She was proud of her work, but every few days another yellow paper appeared on her door. Her mailbox was the wrong shade of blue. Her garden gnome was not allowed. Her welcome mat was too big. Each violation came with a fine. Patricia started keeping a notebook to write down each complaint. In the Army, she learned to document everything. She had a feeling she would need records of what was happening. One evening, Patricia was watering her flowers when a police car drove slowly past her house. The officer inside stared at her for a long time. This happened 3 times that week. Patricia was not worried. She had done nothing wrong. But she noticed the police never drove slowly past her neighbors' houses. On Saturday morning, Patricia decided to introduce herself to more neighbors. She knocked on the door of the house across the street. A middle-aged white man answered. "Can I help you?" he asked. He did not open the door all the way. "Hi, I am Patricia Washington. I just moved in across the street. I wanted to say hello." The man looked uncomfortable. "Oh, okay, hi." Patricia waited for him to say his name or invite her in. He did not. "Well, if you ever need anything, I am right across the street," Patricia said. "Sure. Thanks." The man closed the door quickly. Patricia tried 3 more houses. The reactions were all the same. People were polite but cold. No one seemed happy to meet her. That afternoon, Patricia was in her backyard planting tomatoes when she heard voices from next door. Mrs. Henderson was talking to another woman. "I just do not know about her," Mrs. Henderson said. "She seems nice enough, but you never know with those people." "What kind of work does she do?" the other woman asked. "I have no idea. She was probably in the military or something." "You know how they can be." Patricia stopped digging. She had been proud of her military service. She served her country with honor. But now it felt like people saw her service as something bad. The next Monday, Patricia got her biggest violation notice yet. The HoA said her grass was 1 inch too tall in the back corner of her yard. The fine was $100. Patricia went to her backyard and measured the grass with a ruler. It was exactly the same height as all her neighbors' grass, but she cut it anyway and paid the fine. That night, Patricia sat in her living room and looked at her military awards on the wall. She had a Purple Heart for being wounded in battle, a Bronze Star for saving 3 soldiers under enemy fire, ribbons and medals for years of faithful service. She had fought enemies in foreign countries. Now she felt like she was fighting a different kind of battle right in her own neighborhood. Patricia made herself a cup of tea and opened the HoA rule book again. If her neighbors wanted to play games, she would learn all the rules. She had beaten tougher enemies than a bunch of petty neighbors, but deep down, Patricia felt sad. All she wanted was a peaceful place to call home. Instead, she found herself in another war zone. This time, the enemy lived next door. 3 weeks after moving in, Patricia had received 12 violation notices. She kept them all in a folder on her kitchen table. Each one made less sense than the last. The HoA complained that her doormat had fringe on it. Fringe was not allowed. They said her flower pots were the wrong color. Terracotta was banned. They even complained that she hung her laundry outside to dry. Clotheslines were considered unsightly. Patricia had grown up hanging clothes outside. Her grandmother taught her it was better for the clothes and saved money. But she bought a dryer anyway. She was tired of fighting over small things. Derek Morrison was the HoA president. He lived in the biggest house on Oak Street. Patricia had never met him, but she knew he was the one signing all her violation notices. His signature was on every yellow paper. Patricia decided to go to the next HoA meeting. Maybe she could talk to these people face to face. Maybe they could work things out like adults. The meeting was held in the community center on Thursday night. Patricia arrived 10 minutes early. She wore her best dress and brought cookies she had baked that afternoon. Only 12 people came to the meeting. Patricia was the only black person in the room. When she walked in, all conversation stopped. Everyone stared at her. Derek Morrison was a tall, thin man with gray hair and cold blue eyes. He wore an expensive suit and looked at Patricia like she did not belong there. "Can we help you?" Morrison asked. "I am Patricia Washington. I live on Maple Street. I wanted to introduce myself and maybe discuss some of the violation notices I've been getting." Morrison looked through his papers. Yes, Mrs. Washington. You have been quite busy keeping us busy." Some people in the room chuckled. Patricia felt her face get hot, but she stayed calm. "I have been trying my best to follow all the rules," Patricia said, "but some of the violations seem unfair. My grass was the same height as my neighbor's grass." "Rules are rules," Morrison said. "If we make exceptions for one person, where does it end?" Patricia sat in the back row and listened to the rest of the meeting. They talked about organizing a neighborhood watch. They discussed banning food trucks from the area. They complained about teenagers riding bikes too fast. When the meeting ended, Patricia stood up. "Excuse me, Mr. Morrison, could I have a word with you?" Morrison looked annoyed. "Make it quick. I was wondering if there is some kind of welcome packet for new residents. Something that explains how things work around here. You got the rule book. That is all you need." Patricia tried a different approach. "I served in the military for 25 years. I am used to following rules and maintaining order. I want to be a good neighbor." Morrison's eyes got even colder. "Military, huh? Well, this is not the Army, Mrs. Washington. We do things differently here." Patricia left the meeting feeling worse than when she arrived. It was clear that she was not welcome in Oakwood Hills. The next morning, Patricia found 2 new violation notices on her door. One said her newspaper was sitting in her driveway too long. The other said her car was parked at the wrong angle. Patricia looked at her car. It was parked exactly like every other car on the street. She took pictures with her phone to document it. That afternoon, Patricia was working in her garden when a woman walked by with a small dog. The dog was friendly and came over to say hello. Patricia petted the little animal and smiled. "He is very sweet," Patricia said to the woman. "Thank you," the woman replied. "Are you new here?" "Yes, I moved in a few weeks ago. I am Patricia. I am Susan Miller. I live 2 streets over." Susan looked around nervously. "Can I give you some advice?" "Of course," Susan lowered her voice. "Be very careful around here. The HoA can make your life miserable if they want to, and Derek Morrison does not like people who are different." "Different how?" Susan looked uncomfortable. "You know, people who do not look like everyone else. People who did not grow up here. People who ask too many questions." Patricia understood.
"Thank you for the warning. I wish I could do more," Susan said.
"But I have to live here too." After Susan left, Patricia felt more alone than ever. Even the friendly neighbors were too scared to help her. The violation notices kept coming. Patricia's mailbox was inspected 3 times in 1 week. First it was too blue. Then it was not blue enough. Finally, they said it was clean, but the post was crooked. Patricia hired a professional to install a new mailbox post. It cost her $200. The next day, she got a violation for having construction work done without a permit. Patricia started documenting everything. She took pictures of her house every morning. She measured her grass weekly. She kept receipts for every repair and improvement. One evening, Patricia was grilling chicken on her back porch when Mrs. Henderson appeared at the fence. "That smells good," Mrs. Henderson said. "Thank you. Would you like some?" "I made too much." Mrs. Henderson looked surprised. "That is very kind, but I could not." "Why not?" "Well, it is just that." Mrs. Henderson looked uncomfortable. "People might talk." Patricia turned off the grill. "Talk about what?" "About me being friends with you. You understand?" Patricia stared at her neighbor. "No, Mrs. Henderson, I do not understand." Mrs. Henderson walked away quickly. Patricia stood alone on her porch, holding a plate of food with no one to share it with. The next day brought 3 more violation notices. Her garden hose was visible from the street. Her welcome mat was considered a tripping hazard. Her house numbers were the wrong font. Patricia went to the hardware store to buy the right kind of house numbers. The young man who had helped her before shook his head when he saw her. "They are really going after you, are not they?" he said. "It seems that way. I have lived here my whole life. I have never seen them pick on someone like this before." Patricia bought the new house numbers and went home. As she was installing them, Derek Morrison drove slowly past her house. He stared at her for a long moment before driving away. That night, Patricia called her sister in California. "Maybe you should just move," her sister said. "Life is too short to deal with people like that." "I'm not running away," Patricia replied. "I bought this house fair and square. I have every right to live here. But is it worth all this stress?" Patricia looked at her military awards on the wall. "I did not fight for freedom overseas just to give up my freedom at home." After she hung up, Patricia made a decision. She would not let Derek Morrison and his friends drive her away. She had faced worse enemies than a petty HoA board. But she also knew this was just the beginning. The violation notices were getting more frequent and more ridiculous. Patricia had a feeling that Morrison and his friends were planning something bigger. She opened her laptop and started researching her legal rights. If they wanted a fight, she would be ready. Patricia had been living in Oakwood Hills for 2 months. The violation notices came every few days now. She had paid over $800 in fines for things like having the wrong kind of doorbell and planting flowers that were too colorful. Despite all the harassment, Patricia kept her head high. She had dealt with difficult people before. In the Army, she learned that bullies eventually got tired if you did not give them what they wanted. But Derek Morrison was not getting tired. He was getting angrier. On a Saturday afternoon in June, Patricia decided to have a small cookout. She had not made any real friends in the neighborhood, but she had 3 Army buddies who lived nearby. She invited them over for burgers and beer. Marcus Johnson arrived first. He was a big black man who had served with Patricia in Afghanistan. Sarah Kim came next. She was a Korean-American woman who had been Patricia's commanding officer in Iraq. Finally, James Rodriguez showed up. He was a Latino man who had saved Patricia's life during a bombing in Baghdad. The 4 friends sat on Patricia's back deck and caught up on old times. They talked about their families, their new jobs, and their struggles adjusting to civilian life. They laughed about funny things that had happened during their military service. Patricia felt happy for the first time since moving to Oakwood Hills. These people understood her. They respected her. They did not care what color she was or where she came from. At around 6 o'clock, Patricia put music on her phone and set it on the deck table. It was not loud. They could barely hear it over their own conversation, but it made the evening feel more festive. Mrs. Henderson appeared at the fence around 7 o'clock. She stared at the group with a sour expression. "Good evening, Mrs. Henderson," Patricia called out. "Would you like to join us?" Mrs. Henderson did not answer. She stood there watching them for several minutes, then went back inside her house. "Friendly neighbor?" Marcus asked. "Something like that," Patricia replied. The friends stayed until about 9 o'clock. They cleaned up all their trash and stacked their chairs neatly. The music had been turned off hours earlier. They were just sitting and talking quietly when they left. Patricia thought it had been a perfect evening. Finally, she felt at home in her own backyard. She was wrong. The next morning, Patricia found 4 violation notices on her door. Loud music after 8 p.m., disturbing the peace. Having too many cars in the driveway. Hosting an unauthorized gathering. Patricia stared at the papers in disbelief. The gathering had not been loud. The music was barely audible. There were only 3 extra cars and they were all parked legally on the street. But the fines totaled $500. Patricia marched over to Derek Morrison's house. She had had enough of this nonsense. It was time to have a real conversation. Morrison answered his door wearing golf clothes. He looked annoyed to see Patricia on his doorstep. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Washington? We need to talk about these violation notices. They are getting ridiculous." Morrison looked at the papers in Patricia's hand.
"I do not see anything ridiculous about enforcing our community standards." "Community standards?"
"I had 3 friends over for dinner. We were not bothering anyone. According to multiple complaints, you were playing loud music and hosting what looked like a party." "Multiple complaints? Who complained?" "That information is confidential." Patricia felt her temper rising, but she kept her voice calm. "Mr. Morrison, I am trying to be a good neighbor. But these constant violations are unfair." Morrison stepped closer to Patricia. "Let me be clear about something, Mrs. Washington. This is a quiet, family-friendly neighborhood. We have worked hard to keep it that way. Some people fit in here and some people do not. What is that supposed to mean? I think you know exactly what that means." Patricia stared at Morrison for a long moment. Now she understood. This was not about grass height or mailbox colors. This was about her skin color and the fact that she did not belong to their little club. "I see," Patricia said quietly. "I hope you do, because things are only going to get more difficult if you keep causing problems." "Causing problems? By existing?" Morrison smiled coldly. "By not understanding your place." Patricia walked back to her house with Morrison's words ringing in her ears. She had been naive to think this was just about HoA rules. This was about racism, plain and simple. That afternoon, Patricia was pulling weeds in her front yard when a police car drove slowly past her house. The officer inside stared at her for a long time. This was the 5th time this week. Patricia waved at the officer. He did not wave back. An hour later, the same police car came by again. This time it stopped in front of Patricia's house. The officer got out and walked over to her. "Afternoon, ma'am. I'm Officer Phillips with the Oakwood Hills Police Department." Phillips was a white man in his 30s with short brown hair and mean eyes. He looked Patricia up and down like she was a suspect in a crime. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" "We have been getting some complaints about this address. Noise violations, suspicious activity, large groups of people coming and going, loud music, things like that." Patricia felt her heart racing, but she kept her voice steady. "Officer, I had 3 friends over for dinner last night. We were very quiet and respectful." Phillips wrote something in his notebook. "Well, we will be keeping an eye on things around here, just to make sure there are no more problems." "I appreciate that, officer. I want this to be a safe neighborhood too." Phillips got back in his car and drove away, but Patricia noticed he parked at the end of the street where he could still see her house. That evening, Patricia called her friend Marcus. "They are trying to intimidate you," Marcus said. "This is classic harassment, I know. But what can I do about it? Document everything. Take pictures. Record conversations if you can. And maybe think about getting a lawyer." I should not need a lawyer to live in my own house. You should not need a lot of things in this world. Pat, but here we are. After she hung up, Patricia sat on her couch and thought about her options. She could move away and let Derek Morrison win. She could keep paying fines and hope things got better. Or she could fight back. Patricia had never backed down from a fight in her life. She was not about to start now, but she also knew that things were escalating. The police were involved now. Morrison was making threats. Her neighbors were watching her every move. Patricia had a bad feeling that something worse was coming. In the army, she learned to trust her instincts. And right now, her instincts were telling her to be very careful. She double-checked the locks on her doors and windows. She moved her phone charger to the table by her bed. She made sure her car keys were always in the same place. Patricia hoped she was being paranoid. But 25 years of military service had taught her to prepare for the worst. And in Oakwood Hills, the worst was yet to come. Patricia woke up early on Saturday morning like she always did. Old Army habits were hard to break. She made coffee and sat on her front porch to watch the sunrise. It was her favorite time of day. The street was quiet and peaceful. A few neighbors were walking their dogs. Mrs. Peterson from across the street was getting her newspaper. Everything looked normal. Patricia was finishing her second cup of coffee when she saw the police car coming down the street. It was moving slowly like the officer was looking for something. The car stopped in front of Patricia's house. 2 officers got out. One was Phillips, the officer who had visited her before. The other was younger with blonde hair and a cocky attitude. Patricia set down her coffee cup and walked to the edge of her porch. She had done nothing wrong, but her heart started beating faster. In her experience, nothing good happened when police showed up at your door early in the morning. "Good morning, officers," Patricia said calmly. "Can I help you?" Phillips walked up to her front steps. "We need to talk to you about some complaints we received." "What kind of complaints?" "Disturbing the peace, threatening behavior toward your neighbors. We take these things very seriously in Oakwood Hills." Patricia felt confused. She had barely spoken to her neighbors in weeks. "I have not threatened anyone." "Who made this complaint?" "That is not important right now," the younger officer said. His name tag read Martinez. "What is important is that we get this situation under control." Patricia stayed on her porch. She knew her rights. "Officers, I have not broken any laws. If you want to search my property or question me formally, you need a warrant." Phillips stepped closer. "Are you refusing to cooperate with a police investigation?" "I am asking to see proper documentation for whatever you think I have done wrong." The 2 officers looked at each other. Patricia could see they were getting angry. She had seen that look before in the army when soldiers did not like being questioned by a woman. "Step down from the porch, ma'am," Phillips ordered. "Why?" "Because I'm telling you to." Patricia knew she was in trouble. These officers had not come here to investigate a complaint. They had come here to intimidate her. Maybe Derek Morrison had put them up to it. Maybe they were acting on their own prejudices. Either way, she was in danger. "Officers, I would like to call my lawyer," Patricia said. "You can call your lawyer from jail if you keep being difficult," Martinez replied. Patricia pulled her phone out of her pocket. Before she could dial, Phillips grabbed her wrist. "Drop the phone," he ordered. "You have no right to touch me." Phillips twisted Patricia's arm behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder. "You are under arrest for resisting arrest and threatening a police officer." "I did not threaten anyone." Martinez grabbed Patricia's other arm. Together, the 2 officers forced her down the porch steps and onto her front lawn. Patricia did not resist, but they handled her roughly anyway. "Please," Patricia said. "I am not resisting. You do not need to hurt me." But the officers were not listening. They forced Patricia to her knees on the grass. Phillips put his knee on her back to hold her down. "This woman has been a problem since she moved here," Phillips said to Martinez. "Time to send a message." Martinez pulled out a small knife from his pocket. Patricia's eyes went wide with fear. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Community health and safety inspection," Phillips said with a nasty smile. "Your hair's too long." "It is unsanitary. We have been authorized by the HoA to fix this problem." Patricia realized what they were about to do. "No, please do not do this." But Phillips held her down while Martinez grabbed her hair. Patricia had always been proud of her natural hair. She took care of it and wore it in neat styles. It was part of who she was. Martinez started cutting. He was not careful or gentle. He hacked away at Patricia's hair with the small knife, leaving jagged, uneven patches. Hair fell onto the grass around her. "Stop," Patricia cried. "This is assault!" "This is what happens when you do not follow the rules," Philip said. Neighbors started coming out of their houses to see what was happening. Mrs. Henderson stood on her porch with her hand over her mouth. The man from across the street took out his phone and started recording. Patricia tried to stay calm, but tears ran down her face. This was worse than anything that had happened to her in combat. At least in war, she knew who the enemy was and why they were fighting. Martinez finished cutting Patricia's hair. It looked terrible. Patches were completely bald while other parts stuck up in odd angles. Patricia looked like she had been attacked by a wild animal. Phillips took pictures of Patricia with his phone. "There," he said. "Now you look more appropriate for this neighborhood." The officers finally let Patricia stand up. She touched her ruined hair and felt sick to her stomach. "You cannot do this," she whispered. "We just did," Martinez replied. "And if you cause any more problems, it will get worse." Patricia looked around at her neighbors. Some were staring in shock. Others had gone back inside their houses. No one tried to help her. The officers got back in their car and drove away. Patricia stood alone on her front lawn with her hair scattered around her feet. Mrs. Henderson walked over slowly. "Patricia, I am so sorry. I had no idea they would do something like this." Patricia looked at her neighbor with dead eyes. "Yes, you did. You all knew. You just did not care." Patricia walked back into her house and locked the door. She went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. Her hair was ruined. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt. But her eyes still held fire. Patricia had been humiliated in the worst possible way. But she was still alive. She was still fighting. She picked up her phone and called the FBI. This was not just a local police matter anymore. This was a federal civil rights violation. "I need to report an assault by police officers," Patricia told the agent who answered. "And I have evidence." Patricia hung up and looked at herself in the mirror again. She looked like a victim, but she was not going to act like one. She was Brigadier General Patricia Washington, United States Army. She had survived combat in 2 wars. She had led thousands of soldiers into battle. She had earned the respect of the most powerful military in the world. 2 racist cops and a petty HoA president had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. They had no idea who they were messing with. After Patricia called the FBI, she sat in her bathroom trying to figure out what to do next. Her hair was ruined, but she needed to look presentable when the federal agents arrived. She found a scarf and wrapped it around her head. 30 minutes later, Patricia heard car doors slamming outside. She looked through her window and saw Phillips and Martinez walking around her front yard. They were taking more pictures and laughing about something. "Look at all this hair on the grass," Martinez said. "We should cite her for littering." Phillips picked up some of Patricia's hair from the ground. "Maybe we should keep this as evidence. You know, in case she tries to say we did not give her a proper haircut." The 2 officers were so busy making jokes that they did not notice the 3rd police car that had just arrived. Sergeant Maria Rodriguez got out of her vehicle and walked over to them. Rodriguez was a Latina woman in her 40s with 20 years on the force. She had seen a lot of bad things in her career, but nothing had prepared her for what she was looking at now. "What the hell happened here?" Rodriguez demanded. Phillips stopped laughing. "Oh, hey, Sergeant. We were just handling a problem resident. The HoA requested our assistance with a health and safety violation." Rodriguez looked at the hair scattered across the lawn. "You cut off this woman's hair?" "She was being non-compliant," Martinez explained. "We had to take action to maintain order in the community." Rodriguez stared at the 2 officers like they had lost their minds. "You assaulted a civilian because of an HoA complaint?" "It was not assault," Phillips said defensively. "It was a justified enforcement action." Rodriguez walked up to Patricia's front door and knocked. "Ma'am, this is Sergeant Rodriguez with the police department. I need to speak with you." Patricia opened the door slowly. She still had the scarf wrapped around her head, but Rodriguez could see the pain and anger in her eyes. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Rodriguez asked gently. "No, I'm not all right. Your officers just attacked me in my own front yard." Rodriguez looked back at Phillips and Martinez. They were still standing in the yard like nothing unusual had happened. "Can you tell me your name, ma'am?" "Patricia Washington." Rodriguez wrote the name in her notebook. Something about it sounded familiar, but she could not place it right away. "Mrs. Washington, I am very sorry about what happened here. Can you show me some identification so I can file a proper report?" Patricia went inside and came back with her driver's license and military ID card. She handed both to Rodriguez. Rodriguez looked at the military ID and her face went completely white. The name on the card read Brigadier General Patricia Washington, United States Army. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said in a quiet voice. "Are you General Patricia Washington?" "The General Washington?" "Yes, I am." Rodriguez felt like she was going to be sick. She had heard stories about General Washington during her own military service. Patricia was a legend in Army circles. She had served with distinction in Iraq and Afghanistan. She had earned a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and a Distinguished Service Cross. Rodriguez looked at Patricia's ruined hair and felt ashamed to be wearing the same uniform as Phillips and Martinez. "General, I am so sorry. This should never have happened." Patricia saw the recognition in Rodriguez's eyes. "Sergeant, I assume you understand how serious this situation is." "Yes, ma'am." "I understand completely." Rodriguez walked back over to Phillips and Martinez. Her entire demeanor had changed. She was no longer just a sergeant dealing with a civilian complaint. She was a soldier facing a superior officer. "Do you two idiots have any idea who you just assaulted?" Rodriguez asked. Phillips shrugged. "Some woman who would not follow HoA rules." "That woman is Brigadier General Patricia Washington. She is one of the most decorated officers in the United States Army." Martinez laughed. "Come on, Sergeant. That woman is not a general. Look at her." Rodriguez got very close to Martinez's face. "She has a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and a Distinguished Service Cross. She commanded thousands of soldiers in combat. She has killed more enemy fighters than you have given traffic tickets." Phillips finally looked worried. "How do you know all this?" "Because I served in Iraq. Everyone in the Army knows General Washington's reputation." Rodriguez walked back to Patricia. "General, I need to ask you some questions for my report. But first I want you to know that I am going to make sure these officers face serious consequences for what they did." Patricia nodded. "Thank you, Sergeant. But this is bigger than just two bad cops. This whole neighborhood has been harassing me for months. Can you tell me about that?" Patricia brought out her folder full of violation notices. She showed Rodriguez pictures of her property and documentation of all the fines she had paid. Rodriguez looked through everything with growing anger. "This is systematic harassment. Someone has been orchestrating this campaign against you. Derek Morrison. He is the HoA president. We need to have a conversation with Mr. Morrison." While Rodriguez was taking Patricia's statement, Phillips and Martinez stood in the yard looking worried. They were starting to realize they had made a terrible mistake. "We are screwed," Martinez whispered. "Maybe not," Phillips replied. "Who is going to believe her story over ours?" But their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another police car. This one was driven by Police Chief Robert Thompson. Thompson was a Vietnam veteran who had great respect for military service. When he got Rodriguez's emergency call, he dropped everything and raced to the scene. Thompson looked at the hair on the ground, then at Patricia standing in her doorway with a scarf on her head, then at his two officers who were trying to look innocent. "Sergeant Rodriguez, what exactly happened here?" Rodriguez handed him Patricia's military ID. Thompson looked at it and his face turned red with anger. "General Washington, I am Police Chief Thompson. On behalf of the entire Oakwood Hills Police Department, I want to apologize for this outrageous attack on you." Patricia came down from her porch. "Chief Thompson, your officers told me they were acting on behalf of the HoA. They said this was a health and safety inspection." Thompson looked at Phillips and Martinez like he wanted to strangle them. "There is no such thing as a health and safety inspection that involves cutting someone's hair. These officers were acting completely outside their authority. So what happens now? Now these two are suspended without pay pending a full investigation. And you have my word that they will face criminal charges for assault." Phillips tried to defend himself. "Chief, we were just trying to maintain order in the community. The HoA president said this woman was a troublemaker. The HoA president does not give orders to my officers. And even if he did, assaulting citizens is never acceptable." Thompson turned back to Patricia. "General, I served in Vietnam. I know what military service means. What happened to you today is a disgrace to everything we are supposed to protect." Patricia felt some of her anger starting to fade. Finally, someone in authority was taking this seriously. "I appreciate that, Chief Thompson, but I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else." "It will not. You have my word." As more police cars arrived to process the scene, neighbors started coming out to watch. Patricia noticed that some of them looked shocked and ashamed. They were beginning to understand that they had been part of something terrible. But Patricia also noticed that Derek Morrison was nowhere to be seen. She had a feeling he was already trying to figure out how to cover his tracks. The man who had started this whole nightmare was about to learn that attacking a decorated war hero was the biggest mistake of his life. Derek Morrison was playing golf at the country club when his phone started ringing. He ignored the first few calls, but they kept coming. Finally, he answered. "Derek, we have a problem," said his wife Linda. She sounded panicked. "What kind of problem?" "That woman on Maple Street. The police just cut off her hair in her front yard. There are cop cars everywhere. People are taking videos." Morrison felt his stomach drop. "What do you mean they cut off her hair?" "Your brother-in-law Jake and his partner. They said it was some kind of HoA enforcement action." "Derek, what did you tell them to do?" Morrison's mind raced. He had called Jake Phillips a few days ago and complained about Patricia Washington. He had said she was causing problems and needed to be handled, but he never told Jake to assault her. "I need to get home," Morrison said. Morrison drove home as fast as he could. When he got to Oakwood Hills, he could see the police cars from 3 blocks away. There were at least 6 vehicles in front of Patricia's house. Morrison parked his car and walked over to see what was happening. Chief Thompson was talking to a Hispanic police sergeant. Jake Phillips and his partner were standing by themselves looking worried. Morrison tried to get Jake's attention, but the chief saw him first. "Mr. Morrison," Thompson called out, "I need to speak with you." Morrison felt sweat running down his back. "Of course, Chief, how can I help?" "My officers claim they were acting on behalf of the HoA when they assaulted Mrs. Washington. Did you authorize this action?" "Assault? I do not know anything about an assault." Thompson pointed to the hair scattered on Patricia's lawn. "Your brother-in-law and his partner cut off this woman's hair with a knife. They said it was an HoA health and safety inspection." Morrison felt dizzy. "I never authorized anything like that. I may have mentioned that Mrs. Washington was not following community rules, but I never told anyone to hurt her." "So you did discuss Mrs. Washington with Officer Phillips?" Morrison realized he was in serious trouble. "We may have talked about her, but just in general terms. You know how family conversations go." Chief Thompson wrote something in his notebook. "Mr. Morrison, I need you to understand something. The woman your brother-in-law just assaulted is Brigadier General Patricia Washington. She is a decorated war hero." Morrison felt like the ground was falling out from under him. "She is a general?" "A general who has been systematically harassed by your HoA for months. A general who has documentation of every violation notice, every fine, every attempt to drive her out of this neighborhood." Morrison looked over at Patricia, who was talking to FBI agents that had just arrived. She looked dignified and composed despite everything that had happened to her. "Chief Thompson, I had no idea she was military." If you had known what?" "That she was a human being who deserved to be treated with respect?" Morrison did not have an answer for that. While Morrison was talking to the police chief, his phone kept ringing. Board members from the HoA were calling in a panic. Word was spreading fast through the neighborhood. Finally, Morrison answered one of the calls. It was Helen Walsh, the HoA treasurer. "Derek, is it true? Did the police really attack that woman?" "Helen, I cannot talk right now. The whole neighborhood is talking about it. People are saying she is some kind of war hero. Is that true?" Morrison looked at Patricia again. She was showing documents to the FBI agents. "It might be true. Derek, we are in serious trouble. If this gets out to the media..." Morrison hung up the phone. Helen was right. This was going to be a disaster. Morrison tried to call his lawyer but got voicemail. He tried to call the mayor, but his assistant said he was unavailable. Finally, Morrison called his wife. "Linda, I need you to get our lawyer on the phone right now." "Derek, what is going on?" "People are saying Jake cut off a general's hair. Just get the lawyer." Morrison spent the next hour watching his carefully ordered world fall apart. More police arrived. FBI agents took pictures of everything. Neighbors stood in small groups talking and pointing. And in the middle of it all, Patricia Washington stood calmly answering questions and providing documentation of months of harassment. Morrison's phone buzzed with a text message from Jake Phillips. "Need to talk." "This is bad," Morrison texted back. "Cannot talk now. Get your own lawyer." Another text came from Helen Walsh. "Emergency HoA board meeting tonight. We need to figure out damage control." Morrison looked around at all the police and FBI agents. There was no controlling this damage. This story was going to be everywhere by tomorrow. Around 5 o'clock, a news van pulled up to the street. Then another one. Within an hour, there were 3 TV news crews setting up cameras. Morrison watched from his living room window as reporters interviewed neighbors. He could not hear what they were saying, but he could see people shaking their heads and looking ashamed. Morrison's lawyer finally called him back. "Derek, I have been getting calls about this situation all afternoon. Tell me exactly what happened." Morrison explained everything he could remember, the months of violation notices, his complaints to Jake about Patricia being a problem resident, the conversation about teaching her a lesson. "Derek, did you specifically ask your brother-in-law to assault this woman?" "No, I just said she needed to be handled. I thought maybe he could give her a warning or something." "Well, giving someone a warning does not involve cutting off their hair with a knife." Morrison felt sick. What am I looking at here? Potentially civil rights violations, conspiracy charges, definitely multiple lawsuits. This woman is going to own half of Oakwood Hills by the time this is over. That evening, Morrison attended the emergency HoA board meeting. Only 4 of the 7 board members showed up. The others were too scared to be associated with the situation. "We need to suspend Derek immediately," said Helen Walsh. "Distance the organization from his actions." "My actions?" Morrison protested. "I never told anyone to cut her hair. But you did orchestrate a campaign of harassment against her. We all went along with it, but you were the leader." Morrison looked around the table at his fellow board members. These were people he had worked with for years. Now they were all trying to save themselves. "So you are going to throw me under the bus?" "Derek, this story is going to be on the national news tomorrow. We have to protect the HoA." Morrison left the meeting early. When he got home, Linda was watching the evening news. Patricia's story was the lead item on all 3 local channels. Community leaders are calling for a full investigation into what they are, calling a shocking attack on a decorated war hero, the reporter said. Morrison turned off the TV and poured himself a large drink. His phone was still ringing with calls from reporters, but he was not answering. Outside his window, Morrison could see Patricia's house. There were still police cars in front of it. TV crews were still interviewing neighbors. Morrison had spent years building his reputation in Oakwood Hills. He was the HoA president. He was a respected member of the community. He had power and influence. Now all of that was gone, destroyed in one morning by his own prejudice and stupidity. And the worst part was that it was just the beginning. Patricia Washington was not going to quietly disappear. She was going to fight back with everything she had. Morrison was about to learn what it felt like to be on the losing side of a war. By Sunday morning, Patricia's story was everywhere. The video of her standing in her front yard with her hair cut off had been shared millions of times on social media. News channels were running the story every hour. Patricia woke up to find dozens of reporters camped outside her house. She made coffee and sat at her kitchen table reading the news coverage on her laptop. The headlines were powerful. "War hero attacked by police." In her own yard. "Decorated general humiliated by racist officers." The shameful truth about Oakwood Hills. Patricia felt strange seeing her military record discussed on the news. For years she had kept quiet about her service. She did not like to brag or seek attention, but now her achievements were helping people understand how wrong this attack had been. The news reports detailed Patricia's 25 years in the Army. They talked about her 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. They showed pictures of her receiving the Distinguished Service Cross from the Secretary of Defense. One reporter interviewed General Michael Richards, Patricia's former commanding officer. "General Washington is one of the finest officers I have ever known," he said. "She led troops in some of the most dangerous missions of the war. The idea that anyone would treat her this way is disgusting." Patricia's phone had been ringing all morning. Reporters wanted interviews. Lawyers wanted to represent her. Civil rights organizations wanted to help with her case. Around noon, Patricia decided to face the media. She put on her best dress and walked outside to talk to the reporters. "General Washington, how are you feeling after yesterday's attack?" one reporter asked. Patricia stood straight and spoke clearly. "I am disappointed but not surprised. This kind of harassment has been going on for months. Yesterday was just the worst example of it. Do you think this attack was motivated by racism? I think the evidence speaks for itself. I was targeted from the day I moved here because I did not fit their idea of who belongs in this neighborhood. What do you want to see happen to the officers who attacked you? Patricia looked directly into the camera. I want them prosecuted to the full extent of the law, and I want systematic changes to make sure this never happens to anyone else. After the press conference, Patricia went back inside her house. She felt emotionally drained but also empowered. Finally, people were listening to her story. Throughout the day, supporters started arriving at Patricia's house. Veterans from all over the state came to show their solidarity. Civil rights activists organized a vigil on her front lawn. Neighbors who had been silent for months finally came forward to apologize. Marcus Johnson, her Army friend, drove down from Seattle. Pat, I'm so sorry this happened to you, he said. But I am proud of how you are handling it. I learned from the best, Patricia replied. You taught me to never back down from a fight. The story continued to grow throughout the week. National news programs picked it up. Celebrity activists shared Patricia's story on social media. The hashtag Justice for General Washington started trending on Twitter. By Wednesday, protesters were gathering outside the Oakwood Hills police station. Veterans groups organized marches. The NAACP announced they were filing federal civil rights complaints. The pressure on local officials became overwhelming. The mayor held a press conference calling for a complete investigation. The city council scheduled emergency meetings. The police chief announced that Phillips and Martinez had been fired and would face criminal charges. Derek Morrison tried to lay low, but reporters found him anyway. When cameras caught him leaving his house, he looked terrible. His face was pale and he had dark circles under his eyes. Mr. Morrison, did you order the attack on General Washington? A reporter shouted. Morrison hurried to his car without answering. But his silence only made him look more guilty. The HoA board held another emergency meeting and voted to remove Morrison as president. They also voted to drop all violation notices against Patricia and refund every fine she had paid. But it was too late for damage control. The story had taken on a life of its own. On Thursday, Patricia received a phone call from Senator Elizabeth Warren's office. The senator wanted to invite Patricia to testify before Congress about housing discrimination and police brutality. I would be honored, Patricia told the staffer. On Friday, Patricia got an even bigger surprise. The Secretary of Defense called her personally. General Washington, I want you to know that the entire Department of Defense stands behind you, he said. What happened to you is an attack on every person who has worn the uniform. Thank you, sir. That means a lot. I also want to offer you a position as a special advisor on military affairs. We need people like you helping to shape policy. Patricia was stunned. A week ago, she was being harassed by her HoA. Now she was being offered a job by the Pentagon. The weekend brought more protests and more media coverage. Patricia appeared on 3 Sunday morning news shows. Each interview reached millions of people with her message about equality and justice. On Sunday afternoon, Patricia was surprised to see Mrs. Henderson at her door. Her elderly neighbor looked ashamed and nervous. Patricia, I owe you an apology, Mrs. Henderson said. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I was scared and ignorant, but that is no excuse. Patricia invited her inside for coffee. I appreciate you coming over, Mrs. Henderson. I grew up in a different time. That does not make racism right, but it is the only explanation I have for my behavior. It takes courage to admit when you are wrong, Patricia said. Thank you for that. Mrs. Henderson started crying. When I saw what those officers did to you, I was horrified. That is not who I want to be. Patricia handed her neighbor a tissue. People can change, Mrs. Henderson. It is never too late to do better. Over the next few days, more neighbors came to apologize. Some brought flowers. Others brought food. A few offered to help with yard work or home repairs. Patricia was gracious to everyone, but she was also realistic. She knew that real change would take more than apologies. On Tuesday, the FBI announced that they were filing federal civil rights charges against Phillips and Martinez. They were also investigating Derek Morrison for conspiracy and civil rights violations. Patricia's lawyer filed lawsuits against the police department, the HoA, and Morrison personally. The lawsuits sought millions in damages and systematic reforms to prevent future discrimination. The story continued to inspire people around the country. Veterans groups started scholarship funds in Patricia's name. Civil rights organizations used her case to push for stronger anti-discrimination laws. Patricia felt overwhelmed by all the attention, but she also felt hopeful. Her terrible experience was leading to positive changes that would help other people. Most importantly, Patricia was no longer fighting alone. She had the support of millions of Americans who believed in justice and equality. Derek Morrison and his racist friends had thought they could
intimidate one black woman into leaving their
neighborhood instead. They had awakened a movement that would change everything. 6 months after the attack, Patricia stood in a federal courthouse watching Jake Phillips and his partner Martinez get sentenced to 3 years in prison for civil rights violations. The judge called their actions a disgraceful abuse of power that strikes at the heart of American values. Patricia felt no joy watching the two men being led away in handcuffs. She had seen too much violence in her military career to take pleasure in anyone's downfall, but she felt satisfied that justice was finally being served. Outside the courthouse, Patricia spoke to reporters one more time. Today's verdict sends a clear message that no one is above the law. Police officers who abuse their power will be held accountable. Derek Morrison's trial was scheduled for next month. He faced federal conspiracy charges and multiple civil rights violations. His lawyers were trying to negotiate a plea deal, but Patricia's legal team was not interested in letting him off easy. The civil lawsuits had already been settled. The city of Oakwood Hills paid Patricia $2 million and agreed to major reforms in police training and community relations. The HoA paid another $1 million and was forced to operate under federal oversight for 5 years. But for Patricia, the money was never the point. She used most of the settlement to establish the General Patricia Washington Foundation, which provided legal help to victims of housing discrimination and police brutality. Patricia's life had changed completely over the past year. She accepted the position as special advisor to the Secretary of Defense and was now working on policies to help veterans transition to civilian life. She traveled around the country speaking about civil rights and social justice. Her hair had grown back, and she wore it in a natural style that made her look strong and confident. She had lost weight from all the stress, but her eyes were brighter than they had been in years. Fighting for justice had given her a new sense of purpose. The neighborhood had changed too. Derek Morrison moved away in shame after his trial. Several other families who had supported the harassment campaign also left Oakwood Hills, but many residents stayed and worked to make things better. They elected a new HoA board that included people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. They rewrote all the community rules to eliminate discriminatory language. They started a diversity committee to promote inclusion and understanding. Mrs. Henderson became one of Patricia's closest friends and biggest supporters. She volunteered at the foundation and helped organize community events that brought people together. I learned more about myself in the past year than I did in the previous 70 years. Mrs. Henderson told Patricia one day, "Shame is a powerful teacher." The Oakwood Hills Police Department also underwent major changes. Chief Thompson retired early and was replaced by Maria Rodriguez, the sergeant who had first recognized Patricia's military rank. Rodriguez implemented new training programs on cultural sensitivity and community policing. 1 year after the attack, Patricia organized a community reconciliation event in the park near her house. Hundreds of people came, including veterans, civil rights activists, and neighbors who wanted to show their support. Patricia stood at a podium and looked out at the diverse crowd. A year ago, she had felt completely alone in this neighborhood. Now she was surrounded by allies and friends. 12 months ago, I was attacked in my own front yard because some people could not accept having a black woman as their neighbor, Patricia began. That attack was meant to humiliate me and drive me away. The crowd listened intently as Patricia continued. But something unexpected happened. Instead of destroying me, that attack made me stronger. Instead of silencing me, it gave me a voice. Instead of dividing our community, it brought us together. Patricia paused and looked around at the faces in the crowd. She saw Mrs. Henderson sitting in the front row with tears in her eyes. She saw Maria Rodriguez standing with other police officers who were committed to doing better. She saw young children playing together regardless of their race or background. "I want to be clear about something," Patricia said. "I do not forgive what Derek Morrison and those officers did to me. Their actions were criminal and cruel, but I do believe in the possibility of redemption. I believe people can change if they are willing to do the hard work." Patricia talked about her vision for Oakwood Hills as a model community where diversity was celebrated instead of feared. She announced new programs that would provide scholarships for underprivileged children and support services for veterans. "We cannot change the past," Patricia concluded, "but we can build a better future. And that is exactly what we are going to do." After her speech, Patricia mingled with the crowd. Young children asked her about her military service. Veterans thanked her for standing up to injustice. Neighbors apologized for their past silence and promised to do better. As the sun set over Oakwood Hills, Patricia stood in her front yard and reflected on everything that had happened. The grass where her hair had fallen was now covered with flowers that neighbors had planted in her honor. Her house had become a symbol of resistance and resilience. Tour buses sometimes drove by so people could see where the famous General Washington lived. Patricia did not mind. She hoped her story would inspire others to fight for their rights. Patricia's phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Johnson. "Saw you on the news again. Proud of you, General." Patricia smiled and typed back, "Just getting started." Inside her house, Patricia looked at the wall where her military awards hung. Next to them were new honors she had received over the past year. A humanitarian award from the NACP, a courage award from the Veterans Association, a letter of thanks from the President of the United States. But the thing Patricia treasured most was a photo from the community reconciliation event. It showed her standing with Mrs. Henderson, Maria Rodriguez, and dozens of neighbors who had become her friends and allies. Patricia had fought battles in Iraq and Afghanistan, but the most important battle of her life had been fought right here in Oakwood Hills. She had faced hatred and violence with dignity and grace. She had refused to be silenced or intimidated. Most importantly, she had shown that one person standing up for justice could change an entire community. Derek Morrison and his friends had thought they were teaching Patricia a lesson about knowing her place. Instead, Patricia had taught them and the whole world a lesson about courage, resilience, and the true meaning of American values. As Patricia got ready for bed, she looked out her window at the peaceful neighborhood street. Children were riding bikes. Families were taking evening walks. People of all colors and backgrounds were living together in harmony. It had taken a terrible act of violence to get here, but Oakwood Hills was finally the kind of place Patricia had dreamed of when she first moved in. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to fight for justice. But tonight, General Patricia Washington was home, surrounded by people who respected her and grateful for the chance to serve her community in a new way. The battle was won, but the war for equality and justice would continue, and Patricia would be on the front lines, leading the fight with the same courage and determination that had made her a decorated war hero. Some fights are worth everything you have to give. This had been one of those fights.